have Michael Moss on campus today. My name is Sharon Casimir, and I'm the director of the Food Studies program here at Hofstra. Food Studies is our newest minor on campus, and we invite all students to investigate what the minor has to offer. There are brochures in the back, and you'll see that it's an interdisciplinary minor that draws in a lot of departments in the Hofstra College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but also in other schools, including communication and allied health sciences and such. So we invite you to think about food studies and to perhaps register for the food studies class. It's being offered in fall of 2019. So if you're looking at your course schedule and find yourself needing an interdisciplinary studies course, please, by all means, we have a wonderful course on offer. Okay. So we have Michael Moss today, and we want to welcome him to campus. Michael is an investigative reporter who's worked at New York Newsday for almost 10 years, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times for over a decade. Michael won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on food safety issues in the beef industry. His reporting on a government animal research center in Nebraska is featured in the new film, Eating Animals. Michael's book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us, was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And he's at work on a new book that'll be out soon, titled Hooked, Food and Free Will. Michael's work is a testament to the vital importance of investigative journalism and deep research in our everyday lives. On behalf of the Food Studies program, I welcome Hofstra University and thank all of you for being here. And I just should say also that we have co-sponsors, I forgot to say that, philosophy, sociology, anthropology, geography, global studies. So thank you to all those departments for collaborating, and welcome to Michael Moss.
Thank you, Sharon. And it's so fabulous to be here. Thank you for having me, and congratulations for going to such a fantastic school. I have a rising junior who goes to school almost up on the Canadian border, where spring comes one day before last classes. So he's totally envious of you. And I've brought with me today my Prezi, which has the Sherlock Holmes footprints. Because for me, going inside the world of the food manufacturers has been like a detective story. So I'm kind of going to walk you through that. But first, I had a question. Did everybody have like a good, healthy breakfast this morning? Did anybody not? Excellent. Well, I'm glad some of you didn't, because even though I got this badge once from a group, a food activist group, I'm not the food police. In fact, this is my normal breakfast, which I had today. So you're not going to learn a lot about nutrition from me. You have professors here and yourselves know more about nutrition than I do. But I hope we're going to learn something about how the food corporations look at nutrition and look at you and do everything they can to get you to love their products. So we'll get started. I'm going to talk kind of fast because I'm really looking forward to your questions. So I don't want to use all of the time. In 2002, Nestle, which at the time was the largest food manufacturer in the world, paid $2.6 billion for this brand. Arguably one of the least healthy items in the food store, and a poster child for, let's say, exuberant eating. And 5 years later, Nestle purchased this drink to help it market to one of the grimmest aspects of the food system. Every year, some 200,000 people in the US have their stomachs surgically shrunk to help them cope with food and eating. Gorge on Hot Pockets, you're gonna eat through a straw. Get them fat, get them thin. Basically, I'm reading from page 337 of Salt, Sugar, Fat. And I always laugh, by the way, when I see the cover because Random House had a Russian artist in upstate New York read the book and then go into his grocery store to find all of his favorite products, which he brought back to his studio. And then he very carefully ripped out the letters, and you can still see the rip marks on them, and rearranged the letters to reflect really what's going on inside these products and how salt, sugar, fat is so important to these companies. So, and I thought I tortured Nestle pretty well in the book. So imagine my surprise when the book came out, and I think it was maybe 2 summers later, when I got a call from none other than the head of the research and development division of Nestle on this lovely campus in Lake Geneva, wanting me to come over and give a talk to their R&D chiefs from around the world. I mean, this is a company with some 300 PhD scientists who have invented and nurture what they call their billionaire brands. One of the scientists joked to me that Nestle is like a Swiss bank that prints food. They are so rich. And I remember, and of course I had to pay my way over there, being a journalist, that's what you do. And my rising junior was a little worried about his college tuition. So he said, look, Dad, I hope you're buying a one-way ticket because there's no way Nestle's gonna let you out of there once they're gonna lock you up and throw you in the Swiss dungeon. But no, the head of R&D assured me that they were actually trying to turn a corner and they needed to know all the bad things they had done in order to start doing some good things for people. So I went, and this is the room right before I talked to their research and development executives, and I gave them kind of the full double-barreled 90-minute Michael Moss talk on salt, sugar, fat, and how the food science hooked us. And we don't have time for that full show today, but I can give you kind of the cliff notes of what I told the Nestle executives. And I started out by telling them that I was actually fairly new to food. In 2008, I was working for the New York Times. I was in Algeria actually writing about terrorism when a couple of FBI agents showed up at the New York Times looking for me. I had been traveling to Iraq, tormenting the Pentagon for failing to equip American soldiers and Iraqi soldiers with armor. And I got in some trouble in Algeria and was ordered home to find something new to do. And I mentioned that part of my reporting career only to kind of make the point that I went from one war to another. I was having a meeting with my editor up in the 14th floor lunchroom at the Times, and she goes, well, and I was trying to picture some story about like US arms sales overseas or something related to the work I used to do. She goes, well, Michael, how do you feel about peanuts? And I started laughing. I go back to like tear gas sales and whatever. And she goes, no, hear me out. There's been an outbreak of salmonella in peanuts made by a factory on the Georgia-Alabama border. We can't blame China for this one. Thousands of people are getting sick all over the country. And parents, this is even junk food. Parents are giving these peanuts to their kids as a healthy food. So I went down and took a look, and sure enough, this kind of like window opened up on this trillion-dollar industry. And it was clear in this case, that they had lost track of their ingredient chain because weeks and weeks were going by after this outbreak, and the large snack food companies who were using these peanuts in their products were still trying to figure out, in fact, if they were using these particular peanuts or not so they could initiate a recall. And that reporting on peanuts took me to Minneapolis, where I met Stephanie Smith here, who had a hamburger at her mom's house on Sunday supper, and a week later, she was in a forced coma, which she came out of it paralyzed from the waist down. And that sort of took me into the world of the meat industry, where E. coli continues to be a deadly and ravaging problem for them because they're intentionally losing track of their food chain in order to avoid costly recalls. And I was having dinner with one of my best sources once in Seattle who tests food for pathogens for the meat industry. And he said, you know, Michael, as tragic as these incidents of food contamination are, you really should look at something my industry, and he was talking about processed meat, intentionally adds to their products in order for lots of reasons. And he was mostly concerned about salt. And that got me looking at salt and then sugar and then fat as this unholy trinity on which the processed food industry relies on in getting us and keeping us hooked. And look, I mean, to be sure, we've always known that eating, too much of this stuff can make us unhealthy, overweight, what have you. And there's been some other stuff that we have contributed to the situation. Starting in the 1950s, really 1960, the percentage of women working outside of the home dramatically increased, which cut back or made it much more difficult for us to have meals at home cooked by scratch. And this played right into sort of the whole convenience thing that the food companies were into. There was also a moment in the 1980s when parents stopped saying to their kids, stop snacking. You don't snack in between meals. I mean, the French still think we're crazy. Like, why would you want to ruin your appetite for one of the best moments of the day when family and friends can get together for like a long, slow meal? And then there's one other sort of fact, and we began snacking in huge amounts so that now on average, we're getting the equivalent of a fourth meal in just snacks that we have during the daytime. And by the way, you guys standing, there's room to sit on the sides. You're certainly welcome to come up and hang out if you get tired of standing back there. And then the last thing is that, and the food companies will point this out, he said, look, it's not like we're forcing people to eat sweet stuff, especially, I mean, we are born loving sweet taste in a way that they have found it to be especially fun to sort of run with. And where's my victim? I lost track of Alessandra. There you are, please come up. We have a little demonstration. I haven't done this before, but I wanted to demonstrate to you just how born we are with a sweet taste. So we have 8 ounces of nice water. And this nutrition student, if I can open this box, this looks really complicated, is going to demonstrate to us just how much sweetness in drinks or what have you kids like. And I know because when I was a kid, I got to mix my own Kool-Aid with my own sugar, and there is no way I stopped at the recommended amount. So Alexandra. So we're going to put into this glass 8 teaspoons of sugar. It's only 8 ounces of water, but yep. Five, 6. Woohoo! So we are now at the level, I'm not going to make you drink this. We are now, because we have somebody else, we are now at the level that adults like in sweetness. So keep going. So now to get to the amount, add more. We're going to get to the level that kids like, the optimum amount of sweetness in a product. 1. Those are tiny. Oh, that's fine. 2. 3. 4. There we go. We've got 12. So I don't have to victimize you because it turns out we have a 10-year-old in the audience who's going to come up and try this drink. It's not even dissolving enough, so you're only probably getting like 6 teaspoons. And I'm told you don't drink Perrier water normally. You're like a sweet kid. So just try that and see what you think. Whoa, sorry. It's pretty sweet?
Yeah.
So according to scientists who work for the food companies, and you can sit down now, thank you so much. Pretty sweet. No, you can sit down too, thank you. I might call you back though. Or maybe not. That is the average amount of sweetness that kids love, right? So we're born with that sweet taste. And it's a really sort of important context, in kind of defense of the food companies, because look, one of their main defenses is, look, we're only providing people with what they want. We're not like charities or philanthropies here. We're companies doing what all companies want to do. And in fact, I should say too that's my takeaway from them too, which is that this is not an evil empire that intentionally set out to make us unhealthy or otherwise ill from their products. These are companies doing what all companies want to do, which is make as much money as possible by selling as much product as possible. The problem comes in their deep reliance on salt, sugar, fat to sell those products. And I was incredibly lucky to come across this trove of documentation that allowed me to identify key people in the food industry who I was able to meet and talk to. And they're putting me at the table of the largest companies as they're formulating and marketing and making all kinds of decisions about their products. And the overwhelming sense, and that's what salt, sugar, fat is based on, the documents and interviews with their own people, and the overwhelming sense you get from that material is that this is an industry that's striving to get us not just to like their products, but to want more and more. And as an investigative reporter, I'm supposed to follow the money, and there's a lot of money to follow in this world of food. But I really fell in love with the language that the food companies use, talking to each other about their efforts to get us to want more and more. They talk about making food craveable, snackable, and here's my favorite word, putting engineering, they say, more-ishness into food, right? I mean, these are not English majors. These are bench chemists and marketing people using their own language to communicate with each other about their work. And one of the people I met who I fell in love with is Howard Moskowitz here. He was trained in high math at Queens College and then experimental psychology at Harvard. Howard was responsible for many of the biggest icons in the grocery store because he figured out ways to optimize their allure to get us to want more and more. And he walked me through one of his recent creations, which was a new flavor of soda for Dr. Pepper, in which he started with some 3,000 or 4,000 consumer taste tests around the country, tasting 50, 60 formulas of sweetness, each one just slightly different than the next, and then took the data and threw it in his computer and did his high math regression analysis thing, and out comes these bell curves like here, except at the top of it is not like the dreaded middle C that some students get graded on. It's the perfect amount of sweetness, not too little and not too much. And it was Howard Moskowitz who coined the term the Bliss Point, which you might have heard of, which is how the industry described internally its efforts to optimize the sweetness in the products. And the problem isn't that they've perfected the Bliss Point for things we know and expect to be sweet, like soda or ice cream or cookies. The food companies have marched around the grocery store adding sugar to products that didn't used to be sweet before. So now bread has added sugar and a Bliss Point for sweetness. Yogurts can still have as much sugar per serving as some of them as ice cream. Pasta sauce, one of my favorite parts in the grocery store to kind of marvel at. There are some brands that have had the equivalent of a couple of Oreo cookies with the sweetness in a tiny half-cup serving. And what this has done is created an expectancy in us that everything should be sweet. So when you drag your 10-year-old over to the produce section and get them to try to eat more of those things we should all probably be eating more of, and they get those other tastes that Aristotle wrote about, right? The bitter and the sour, you're going to get a rebellion on your hands. And of course, that sort of explains my boys here. We're much older than this now, but this was our typical, it's basically Halloween every day in the grocery store. With amazing kinds of sugar. I mean, one of the other things they do is they don't just use sugar, they use different kinds of sugar, just in case we've started to get a little nervous and start reading the labels. So who can guess how many kinds of sugar you can find on grocery store food labels? Anybody feeling brave today? No hands at all? Come on, somebody take a wild guess. Yes, 14, very low, 56. These are only some of the nice sugary things you'll find on the ingredient label in case you're poking around. And of course, it's not just sugar that they get excited about. Could we have our 10-year-old back up here again? It's just so exciting to have a real customer. I would like you. These are fabulous, by the way. I bought 2 bags, and my wife ate one last night. She's a big Utz fan. She just goes, so I just want you to put it on your tongue. Don't even chew it. And tell us what taste sensation you get immediately on putting on your tongue. Oh, do you know your taste profiles? What do you, sweetness, sour? What's your tongue picking up?
Bitterness and sourness.
Sourness? How about you?
I mean saltiness.
Saltiness. Thank you so much. You can sit down. Salt is so important to them, right? So chips have salt on the surface. They also have by design, typically 50% of the calories come from fat, because fat provides what the industry calls the mouthfeel. It's what makes that chip melt in your mouth. You almost don't even have to chew it. And frankly, it makes so much of the processed food that's sold in the grocery store melt in our mouth, so we don't even need to chew or use teeth. And at one point, I forgot what this is. Oh, yes. How many types of salt? So we're going to put you on the spot. This is your soon-to-be SAT quiz here. No, you can do it from down there. It's not a trick question. You can probably guess what the answer is, just the way I formulated the question. What's your guess? So how many types of salt does the food industry use, make, fabricate, that goes into processed food? What? 5, 12, or 40? Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, right? I'm going to put the biggest number there. It is 40. 40 kinds of different salt. If you conclude kind of all the shapes and sizes of the salt crystals and the additives that they use for various purposes. And at one point in the reporting I went to the food companies and said, look, I mean, salt has become like this public enemy number 1. I was just on the phone with an older friend of mine just before coming here, and he was having some heart issues, and the doctor told him, no more salt. And he's like, I mean, he was a guy who craved those Costco rotisserie chickens, which are just like dripping with sodium, right? So it becomes an issue as you get older. But I went to the companies, look, everybody's like wanting you to cut back on salt. Like, what's the problem here? Why don't you just cut back on salt? So they said, well, a number of companies sort of helped me out, but Kellogg's was the most fun. They said, come on in, we'll show you. So this is me going into this secret Kellogg's R&D facility where they not only talked to me about salt, but they sat me down to show me why salt is so important to them. They had made for me special versions of their products, which they prepared without any salt at all. And so we started with the Cheetos, actually, which normally I could eat day in and day out, but without salt, the versions that they made, we couldn't swallow them. They stuck to the roof of our mouths because salt adds texture and solubility to their products. We moved on to the frozen Eggo waffles. Is that their brand? Put them in the toaster, and they came out looking and tasting like straw because salt adds color and also the taste. Without which those frozen waffles were really, really horrible. And then the funnest part was we moved to the cornflakes. I didn't even know cornflakes had salt in them, but they do for a really good reason, because we put them in the bowl, added some milk, took a bite, and before I could say anything, the chief spokeswoman for the company who was sitting with me gets this look of horror on her face. She swallows and she blurts out, metal, I taste metal, M-E-T-A-L. And I was thinking, yeah, I thought one of the fillings of my mouth came out. It was like sloshing around in my mouth. I was getting so much metal taste. And the chief technical officer, who's in charge of kind of all things scientific for the company, starts chuckling a bit. And he says, yeah, not everybody will get that taste sensation, but one of the beautiful things about salt for us is that it will mask, cover up some of the off notes, bad taste, that are inherent to many processed foods. In this case, they were adding so many vitamins and minerals to the cereal to make it attractive to people that those things have a really heavy taste if you don't add enough salt to sort of cover that up. And the light bulb went on in my head after that meeting in Kellogg's. In fact, I was driving back to the airport in Detroit. They were out in Battle Creek, Michigan, and I'm on the cell phone with my editor saying, you'll never believe what just happened. I mean, I'm now realizing that these companies are more hooked than we are on using salt, sugar, fat, because they're using them not just for taste, but they're using them as preservatives, as masking agents, as all these sort of industrial purposes, which explains why, say for salt, the salt shaker on your table, the amount of salt that you add in cooking your own food is just a tiny, at most kind of quarter of the amount of salt that goes into your diet, the rest of it being processed foods. So that was surprise number one. Surprise number two, meeting these high-level executives at the largest companies who are willing to talk to me, is that they don't eat their own products. They know better, especially when they get into trouble. And one of the things they know is that they're using extraordinary science to make their products better. Actually, I need Alexander back again for this one. Thank you so much. And again, falling in love, sorry about the noise, falling in love with the language that they use again helped me understand the power. I'm going to torture you with these. So please take one of these puff items, place it on your tongue, and then just kind of press it against the roof of your mouth. You just took half of it.
Okay.
All right, they are huge. In fact, you're going to get the whole bag just for that. And I think you'll notice this sensation. I mean, what happens to the cheese puff? In fact, you didn't really need to chew. You could have just pressed and it would have dissolved a little bit. You're chewing, you can't talk. But you got that sensation of it sort of disappearing? Thank you. You could disappear. No, please take that. Your friends are, yeah, absolutely. Just what a nutrition major wants, right? So the food companies call that the vanishing caloric density. I'll say that again, vanishing caloric density, which is their understanding of what happens in your brain, in your body, when the food disappears because it's melting because of all that great mouthfeel fat in it. That sends a signal to your brain, which normally would tell us to like slow down, don't eat too much. But in this case, the signal is, that food disappeared. So did the calories. Alexander, you might as well eat that whole bag because I'm not getting anything. The calories have vanished. So I love that expression from them. That's just some of the kind of extraordinary science that they're using. But it's not just the science of salt, sugar, fat, even though that's what my book is called. They have this incredible ability to sort of figure out the deepest emotions in us that drive us to eat, to like their products, and to want more and more of them without even being hungry. And I apologize for this. Oh, that's the Cheetos. This slide. Whoa, that's really bad. I'll tell you what it is. This is the very first R&D production line for what became a huge product, Lunchables. Because I was able to meet and spend time. I wish I had some to demonstrate with you. You're getting, oh, you don't like them, so you're an anomaly. Lunchables was, and I spent a whole chapter meeting and writing about the invention of the Lunchables, in part because at one point the people inventing these, and they had a problem. They had like too much processed meat, too much processed cheese. They were trying to find a new way to sell it to people, and they came up with this idea of the Lunchables. And at one point, they're thinking like, there's like no way kids are going to eat these things. And they came up with the cold pizza Lunchables and cold hamburger, taco, cold pancake Lunchables, and the parents are going, there's no way my kids are going to eat these things, but the kids love them. And it was the CEO of Oscar Mayer, the subsidiary of General Foods and then Kraft, where the Lunchables were invented, said, these are less about food than they are about, the emotional power of Lunchables. Because they figured out that when kids go into the lunchroom and pull out their Lunchables out of their box, it was wrapped and marketed so fabulously that they were the cat's meow of the lunchroom. And so they came up with that slogan aimed at kids, all day you got to do what they say, but lunchtime is all yours. And still on the marketing theme, the other character in Salt, Sugar, Fat who I love is this guy, Jeffrey Dunn. For 20 years, he was one of the fiercest warriors at this company. He rose to become president of Coca-Cola for North America and South America, and he walked me through Coke's invention of the supersize me phenomena, where you could walk into a restaurant and for the same price get as much Coke as you could possibly drink. The warlike language that they use in talking about their fight with Pepsi, where they talk about their customers not as their best customers, but as heavy users, people who are drinking a couple of Cokes a day. And the incredible precise targeting they use to get kids to start drinking Coke, where they practice what they call up and down the street marketing, which basically describes their trucks going from corner store to corner store, where they own the racks, the real estate, the coolers in those stores, knowing that when a child like Tatiana here goes into a corner store for the first time with a little bit of her own spending money, she will become what the industry calls brand loyal. And not only kind of the marketing, they do it in the grocery store too, where they will put devices on people's heads to measure their eye movements. And so they know where we focus our attention when we walk into the aisles of the grocery store. And so the grocery store is laid out in a way to get us to make impulsive decisions in kind of the perfect way that increases sales. And so who can guess? That's the college boy right there. Oh, it's been some time, hasn't it? My youngest son. But who can guess? This is staged, obviously. Our normal shopping doesn't quite look like this. But who can guess where they put the most sugary, salty, fattest products in the grocery aisle? Yes, sir. At eye level, in the center of the aisle, knowing that that's where, from the devices they measure eye movements, that's where our attention goes. And so if you want some god-awful thing like plain oatmeal or even the plain Cheerios, you're going to have to look down or up high or at the end of the aisle. And then finally, I'm telling the lovely people at Nestle that one of the remarkable discoveries for me as an investigative journalist, and I start the book with this moment because way back in 1999, none other than the largest food companies get together for a secret meeting in Minneapolis at the old Pillsbury Flour headquarters, where they've come together to talk about none other than obesity. And one of their own, gentleman at Kraft, gets up and he starts pleading with them to start doing something on behalf of consumers to lessen their reliance on salt, sugar, fat. This is one of the slides that he shows the food company executives showing the increase of obesity around the country over the years. And he sits down, he makes a very impassioned speech, and he sits down, and one of the most powerful people in the room, he was head of General Mills at the time, gets up and he's visibly sort of angry at this affront to the companies by one of their own, and he says, look, we care about consumers. If you want to find like a low salt item in the grocery store, it's there. We make low fat products, but there is no way we're going to mess around with the company jewels, as he called them, meaning salt, sugar, fat, if that's going to decrease our sales because we are companies and that's what we do. And by and large, and I also mentioned Nestle, by the way, too, that one of one of the fabulous moments for me too in reporting salt, sugar, fat was realizing the extent to which the processed food industry has interacted with the tobacco industry. Starting in the late 80s, the largest tobacco company in North America, Philip Morris, bought General Foods, this old conglomerate in Tarrytown, New York, and then Kraft, and became the single largest manufacturer of processed food in North America up through about the early to the mid 2000s. And you can, not only can you see through the documents sort of the tobacco managers conveying kind of their tricks and methods for selling tobacco, cigarettes to people, to the food people, but at one point in about 2000, the tobacco guys started to warn the food guys that they were going to end up having as much trouble over salt, sugar, fat, and obesity as the tobacco guys were having over smoking and cancer. Remember, this was 2000 when they just had that huge settlement with the attorneys general, and the tobacco companies had to pay more than $2 billion in compensation to states for the healthcare costs. So those two things together, as a journalist, told me that that is certainly when the clock starts ticking on the companies, because that's when they know from their own people that they are to some large extent culpable, responsible. For at that point, obesity was maybe running, I want to say, like 30%. It's up to a fraction of a percent below 40% right now. 40% of American adults are now obese, meaning on average height person that might be at least 35 pounds overweight and more. And obesity is kind of a bad measure. You can be totally healthy and be obese, but it's one of the best measures that we have of our losing control over our food, over our eating. So that was the Cliff Notes for the spiel I gave to Nestle, and I sat down, and there was kind of some polite applause in the audience, right? And then I spent a couple days swimming around in the research labs at Nestle, where they were impressing upon me all the things that they are doing to make their products better. So they're putting the salt on their products only on the surface, so they get a bigger bang for their salt buck, if you will, and not on the inside. They're switching to non-caloric sweeteners like stevia. They were fiddling around with fat molecules in order to increase the surface area of the molecule, so we get more mouthfeel for the amount of actual fat we're getting. And it all sounds really good. But when you talk to nutritionists, and Alexander's going to second me on this, right? The first thing that they think of when they think about a healthier diet, and it's a bit of a confession on my part, because as much as I focus on salt, sugar, fat, that's not what's on the top of their mind. The top of their mind is getting us to eat more of this stuff. Am I right? Yes, I'm right. Yeah? If we can fill up half of our plates with fruits and vegetables and fruits, we're kind of more than halfway home to having a healthier diet. So I started to think about kind of all the ways that the food system might be changed going forward now, because so many more people are caring about what they're putting in their bodies. And this is a perfect opportunity now to kind of do what the food giants haven't been able to do. And in fact, this is where you guys come in. And there's some incredible stuff happening out there. I mentioned Jeffrey Dunn, Coca-Cola. This is him. He quit Coca-Cola in disgust and went to work for one of the largest farms in the country that grows carrots. And not only that, but he took the marketing schemes that he used at Coke to get us to drink Coke to try to get us to drink carrots. And so he started making these advertisements where eating carrots was suddenly fun, because one of the things we figured out is you can't preach to people about health and food, right? That just doesn't work. The government's been trying to do that for years and years now, and we haven't increased our vegetable fruit intake. So the idea is maybe we can have some fun with advertising and do some advertising marketing in that part of this grocery store that has to do with produce. The other person that switched sides was the inventor of Lunchables, who went to work and helped the inventor, somebody who came up with an incredibly cool new way of going after vending machines, and created this machine that sells salads. And he's got like these are now at O'Hare Airport, you might see them. They're at a bunch of places around 7-Eleven, and switching sides, the inventor of the Lunchables is using kind of the psychology that he learned with Lunchables to help Luke, is the owner of the Farmer's Fridge, figure out ways to better market healthy stuff to us. They're also going after athletes and trying to get them to pitch less of this stuff. Sorry, that said Pepsi, it's a little blurred. And pitching more of this stuff. Everybody know these guys? And so there's a campaign underway because athletes and celebrities are so important to kids, especially in shaping their likes and their dislikes. And then, lo and behold, even some produce growers are starting to create advertisements to pitch their products in a way that you never saw before, because that's been one of the hardest things about produce is that they don't get the advertising money that the rest of the grocery store does. And this is one of my favorite ads for broccoli rabe. Which grows broccoli rabe in California. So I love that ad because it says healthy without saying healthy, right? It says fierceness and strength and power, which from a marketing perspective is I think, more effective. And I even tried my own hand at this idea of marketing vegetables. In fact, I'm still stunned that the New York Times let me do this. So I went to Madison Avenue and I looked for an advertising firm that I could talk into doing for me an entirely fictitious campaign for a vegetable, and then giving out the punchline that it was actually broccoli. And then I wrote a story. Actually, it took a while to find one because most of them were so busy working for the 90% of the grocery store that doesn't sell produce that they didn't have time. But I did manage to find a company, and they went to work, and not only did they invent a marketing campaign for broccoli for me, but they allowed me to film their genius at work when they were trying to figure out how to do this. And I have just a couple of snippets from the video you can find on the New York Times website, but here's the first.
I do not like broccoli, and I haven't liked it since I was a little kid. My mother made me eat it. And I'm from the United States.
I hope you remember George Bush. So at one point, and they were so sweet because they were having so much fun, and one of them came up to me, and one of the people at Pictures was said, thank you. I mean, I've spent my whole career selling stuff that isn't healthy. It's so much fun to be doing something finally that's good for people. But he also said, but this is like one of the hardest things we've ever done, right? I mean, it's easy to sell junk, really hard to sell healthy stuff to people. And at one point they go, look, Michael, you haven't given us any money or advertising budget or anything. So we're going to start really simple. We're going to do some social media, and we're going to pick a fight with like another item in the grocery store. And I think, great, they're going to go after Cheez-Its or cheese puffs or potato chips or whatever. And they go, no, you're forgetting your own chapter in salt, sugar, fat, where you're talking about the Coca-Cola, Pepsi wars, which, as you discovered, were entirely bloodless, because whenever Pepsi got Michael Jackson to do an ad for them and Coke came back with whatever ad that they had, all boats rose in the soda aisle. It brought attention to kind of all soda and helped everyone. So it wasn't the most bloodless war you ever saw in the grocery store. They had this synergy thing going on. So these guys decided to pick a fight with somebody else in the grocery store.
So our key consumer it is magazine. There's a whole section on the vegetables here, and there's a timeline around when all of these vegetables had their it moments. Broccoli is not on this list. There's nothing new or exciting to say about broccoli. Part of our challenge is going to be how to change the visual communication, the visual style of broccoli in culture.
That wall over there says broccoli isn't exactly that cool. But maybe there's something cool in not being cool.
Like, you don't want to keep anyone, but maybe, you know, maybe they're in on the joke. I mean, the fact that broccoli's having its own campaign, I think you could have a lot of fun with.
So you're basically saying, like, I'd like you to live longer. Here's something that's going to do that. So in essence, broccoli is probably a better gift than flowers.
Is it a brocade?
Oh.
Sorry that falls off there. You said, is it a brocade, right? So that's how advertising, correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's how advertising kind of get their juices going, right? They crack like stupid jokes like that. But the point he was making was that maybe we can have some fun with broccoli. So they came up with this fictitious campaign just for me, doing all kinds of fun advertising for broccoli. I mean, they dropped broccoli into volcanoes and they did this, but mostly they picked a fight with none other than Kale. Right? So you can imagine the calls I got from the Kale people. They're still calling me going, come on, why are you picking on us? Well, because the point is, you know, advertising campaign like this, all boats will rise in the produce aisle. But here's the interesting part for you guys. So completely fictitious. I did the story, ran the New York Times Magazine, went away. And then none other than some students at, I think this was Yale, got together. They needed a little project. That sound familiar to anybody? And they took these broccoli kale advertisements and they put them up for real on billboards and stores in one of the biggest food deserts in the country, which is New Haven. You've got the rich school and an impoverished community where people weren't even getting fresh broccoli, but there were a couple of outlets. And they managed to do a little test where they doubled the sales of broccoli in a week using the advertising from the advertising firm. And I thought that was so cool. And then lastly, there's a few of the great things happening out there. You know, 90% of the farmland in this country is planted in soybeans and field corn as ingredients for the processed food industry. The rest has all the other stuff that we can eat, the vegetables and the fruits and the soybeans. And this is a bunch of farmers in the Midwest, of all places, who are deciding to switch sides, stop growing corn and soybeans, and start growing things like microgreens and what have you, knowing that there's actually a lot of profit to be made in growing fruits and vegetables, even though they're harder. Kids are starting to get it. One of the poorest school districts in New York, in Rochester, did a whole year program on food where the kids dissected their favorite products, figured out just what it is about them that kind of drove them crazy. And again, to get them to like the product, not just like the products, but to want more and more. This is one of the posters that one of them came up, because in fact, color is really, really important to the processed food industry. The brighter, more neon the color, again, think about your grocery store, the science says the more apt we are to buy that product and to eat more of it. They also did this cool remix of their favorite products, reformulated them to make them still alluring and tasty, but healthier for them too. And I mention that only because maybe you guys are looking for some school projects where you can go to an elementary school and work with them. But there's some terrific curriculum that people are developing for younger kids to introduce them. Because one of the things I wrote about in Salt, Sugar, Fat, I forgot to mention, is the demise of the home economics system classes, right? I mean, teachers, girls, but also to some extent boys, used to learn how to shop, how to cook, how to be mindful of food. And the home ec teachers about in the 1980s, started teaching us things that were more pressing at the time, things like teenage parenting or getting a job after high school. And so you don't have much food education going on in classes. And lastly, before I take your questions, it's really, really encouraging to see this kind of attention to food happening all over the country. I gave a talk recently in Saudi Arabia to doctors who were dealing with diabetes, and there was, not only are women allowed to go to college now in Saudi Arabia, a new thing, but they were coming up with ways to, and there's a rampant kind of obesity diabetes problem in Saudi Arabia because they're getting hammered from all sides, their own kind of cultural bars on women going to gyms and all of the junk food coming in. And so they're finding ways to sort of demonstrate to people just what is exactly in these products. And I'm so glad I talked fast because I'd love to have your questions now. And if you want to keep in touch or you have some more questions you don't have time for now, feel free to email me. That's a 0 after my name, and then Gmail. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Great audience. So we have questions. If you'd like to shout it out or come up to the mic, either way.
So if everybody would come to the mic to ask their questions, and let's invite students first. It's always to give priority to students, and keep it short, and we'll get as many questions as possible. Come on up.
And I think I was going to say, too, ask about anything if you want to know about the New York Times, journalism, my own eating habits. I already told you about that, the French press, right? Feel free. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. And I'm wondering, though, do you ever look at the role of government and the FDA that has no teeth and what we can do? Because I think they still subsidize the farmers who grow corn and soybeans.
Yeah.
I believe so. So I'm just wondering, that could have a big impact.
I did look at that and write about that. And in some amazing ways, the companies are more powerful than the government agencies that are there, supposedly regulating them on our behalf. And I looked at, for example, the checkoff systems that the USDA, Department of Agriculture, has to help the meat and the dairy and the cheese industry sort of market their products in a way that produce doesn't get marketed. I think I came away feeling that the prospects of getting a more aggressive regulatory environment where the government would actually, look, I mean, we still don't have a suggested amount of sugar on the nutrition facts label of products, even though food advocates have been trying to get that on the label for 30 years, almost 40 years now, actually, going back to 30 years, 1990. So in lieu of kind of the government or anybody sort of thinking the government's going to be more aggressive about that, I'm more along the lines of thinking of ways that we can get the companies on their own, for their own selfish interests, to make and sell better food. Not just food that has less salt, sugar, and fat in it, but food that has more of the vegetables that we need. So I think the prospects for that are much more interesting and encouraging than having rules come down from the government. Thank you. Anybody else? Because they're shy. Could talk about the war in Iraq.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak. I just had a question regarding how you got all these big companies to speak to you candidly about like the truth about their products and why a lot of them were so willing.
So here's the deal. It's a secret, but it's not. It's in the book, in the end notes. When the tobacco companies settled with the state attorneys general and caved in on tobacco and agreed, part of that agreement, besides the $240 billion that they would pay to the states, was that they had to start releasing their internal documents. And they went into an archive that's publicly available. You can search it yourself now online. In those documents was not just the tobacco companies doing tobacco things, but there was Philip Morris communicating with, interacting with their food managers at Kraft. And so suddenly I had this huge mountain of documents, emails and white papers and sales pitches that were prepared internally, thinking they would never see the light of day, And it was with those documents then that I was able to sort of sit myself down at the largest companies and really understand what was going on. But they also identified key people in those industries who'd never talked to a reporter before, but when I called them up and said, look, I've got this memo you wrote, and it's really interesting, but I think it's only half the story. Would you mind sitting down with me and telling me the rest of the story? And I think that what really helped, besides being a good journalist and being empathetic, was their feeling that so many of these guys have come to have misgivings about their life work. And to their defense, they will argue, look, we invented these things at a more innocent era, before women went getting jobs out of the home, and before, we started snacking and et cetera. And the world changed in a way that made us more dependent on their products. But they were all too willing to sort of bare their souls based on the documents and my just being interested in them. And salt, sugar, fat's not a screed. I know, like I say, it's more of a detective story, just how they did it. And that's what I was interested in, and that's what they were very willing to sort of share. Oh, you're welcome. Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
How do you feel about the keto diet and intermittent fasting?
I knew I was
Things
going to
like
get
that?
a keto question. You better not have a GMO question for me. So here's the deal. So I'm not a nutritionist. Most diets work and then fail if they're too extreme, and we can't stay on them, right? But the science of nutrition is kind of still so undeveloped, to use a polite word, that I think if keto works for you, for whatever reason you want to be using it, then more power to you. But I would never preach any particular diet to anybody, low fat, low sugar, anything. I mean, I am of the mind in my own diet of moderation. Eat some of the real fat, real salt potato chips, but not too much. But I'm lucky. I'm a person who can open a bag of potato chips and not feel compelled to eat the whole thing. And a lot of people are not in that situation, so they need to sort of take some extreme measures. Drink diet soda, for example, in order to sort of keep off the real thing. So that's kind of my non-answer to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you very much. I have read your book. I found it very enlightening because I told you
Thank
I
you,
was in the
Stan. We
advertising
met
business.
before. I hope that was good.
Yes, it was. A comment, if I may. You bring up salty snacks. I don't think this is in your book, and correct me. There were studies that were done that crunchiness is a big aspect in addition to the salt and the fat and so forth. And what researchers suggested, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the crunchier it is, the brain responds positively to that, almost at a hypnotic, hallucinogenic extent.
Right.
And companies actually add to that.
Yeah.
I mean, can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It came from a study out of England looking at I've just slipped my mind. What are the little chips that are in a cylinder can? They were looking at Pringles, and they did some studies showing that the more noise the Pringle made when you ate it, the more apt you were to eat more of those Pringles. And Frito-Lay discovered this too. They have in their lab out in Texas a machine that simulates a jaw chewing. And they test chips to perfect the amount of pressure and noise that the chip makes, knowing exactly that the more noise it makes, the more we're apt to eat. So they're using color, they're using noise, they're using smell. Oh my God, when I went to Kellogg to talk about salt, they were whipping up a batch of Pop-Tarts that had gone bad, so it's a huge amount of stuff, and they were dumping it in a dumpster. And the smell wafted across the factory and took me back to my days as a latchkey kid when I would come home from elementary school and pop a Pop-Tart into the toaster. And that smell, I hadn't had a Pop-Tart in 40-some years, brought me instantly right back to that moment. So your memory for food, which I'm writing about in the next book, is also incredibly powerful. So
one last comment, if I may.
Sure.
Unilever is a company not known as a food manufacturer, but they had a product, a toothpaste called AIM toothpaste, campaign that kids like to brush with AIM. What they found out later is because AIM was infused with sugar.
Oh.
That's why kids like to brush with AIM.
Yikes. Sugar?
Yes, and toothpaste.
Well, the companies used to argue that sugar actually wasn't even bad for calories. I mean, the reason sugar isn't on your nutrition facts box now in terms of recommended amount is that the science has been really slow in associating sugar with heart disease and other health problems. And for the longest time, the only thing that food activists could argue is that sugar caused cavities, but the food companies actually argued, even tried to push back on the cavities part for quite a few years. Anyway, yes.
First of all, I think one of the reasons that you're able to do this so well is that you don't have a moralistic attitude.
Thank you.
You know, you're not saying, "Oh my God, these are evil people. We got to destroy them." You're just laying the story out, and I think that's really, really good. I have a bunch of questions. I'll just focus on one. What about water? We, used to be able to just drink water. Now there are so many different kinds of water, and they are infused with this. Where does water come in, if it does?
Yeah, so Jeff Dunn, who left Coca-Cola, before he left, he tried to talk the company into selling more water. I mean, that's what's sort of so fascinating about the food studies program here, which is it looks food from all different perspectives. So when I think of water, first thing I think about is how nurses in elementary schools that are getting hammered by obesity even at a young age are not encouraging their kids to drink fruit juice, which has just as much sugar in it as soda. They're encouraging them to drink plain water. So that's the first thing I think of in terms of water. The second thing is plastic bottles. I mean, I didn't bring my portable water bottle today, but normally I would, because that's certainly the environmental component of bottled water is one that's sort of on the table when we think about food. And in terms of the flavored waters, I mean, that just goes back to what the food companies do and do really well. They call it line extensions, where they make one potato chip, plain potato chips, and then they come up with salt and pepper potato chips and barbecue. And if you look in the store now, there's probably 10 different varieties of potato chips. And what that does is give them more space, more real estate on the grocery store shelf, so it increases their sales. And if they can come up with different flavored waters, that translates into more space on the water shelf in the grocery store and increases sales. So that's why you're starting to see all these flavored waters out there beyond plain. But again, I mean, if you're somebody who's trying to wean yourself off of soda, I mean, we're using SodaStream in my house now because besides smell and noise and color, the bubbles in soda is actually one of the more powerful things besides the sugar. And so seltzer is one of those things that can wean kids off of soda. And if that's what you need in your house, and you need colored water, then more power to you. But that's where the companies are coming from in terms of that variety. It translates into sales for them. And it's a fake kind of variety. Hello.
Hi, thanks for speaking to us.
You're welcome.
So I recently visited Mexico, and then it was surprising for me to find that I can only find Coca-Cola, not Pepsi there. And then so now like Coca-Cola is part of their like food culture. So just wondering if you have any like insights to this whole like.
You can kind of thank Jeff Dunn for that, frankly, because he was still president of Coca-Cola when Coke moved into Latin America and South America. In fact, Jeff had his enlightenment when he went to Brazil and went into one of the favelas, which is sort of a lower income but emerging middle class community in Brazil. It wasn't Rio, it was the other city, and yes, Sao Paulo. And his marketing guys are taking him in there. They're all excited because they're showing him how they designed a smaller Coke, which was more affordable and more storable in these tiny homes in the favelas, as their way of getting this emerging middle class to use and like Coca-Cola. And Jeff says he just heard a voice in the sky that said, there's a lot of things these people need, but it's probably not Coca-Cola. And that's actually when he had his turn and he quit and switched sides and what have you. So the Coke came from aggressive marketing by the Coca-Cola company. In knowing that, especially targeting sort of younger people, knowing that when a young person, and that's why, in fact, Jeff's dad worked for Coca-Cola as a marketing person, and he discovered that if you put Coke in stadiums where kids are going with their parents to see a ball game and having one of the most exciting, thrilling times of their life, and if you can put a Coke in their hands at that moment, that's going to implant in their brain, in their memory banks, in a way that no amount of sort of other advertising can do. So that just kind of speaks to the genius of Coke being able to market to people. And lo and behold, I think Mexico has the second highest obesity rate in the world after the United States.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Thank you, first of all. Sometimes you go to the grocery store and there is things like low fat, low sugar, and all this, but the price is double.
Oh, that's so interesting. Or gluten-free stuff
Yeah,
is
all those
probably
things,
is
but
more
then the
expensive.
price-
Yeah.
They put less.
Yeah. So I think there's some quotient going into that, which it's depends how excited you are about buying something, and they can raise the price. I mean, the other price issue in the grocery store, though, which is maybe even bigger, is that a pint of fresh blueberries, especially off season, will cost as much as a 4-cheese, 3-meat, 2-pound frozen pizza. And so if you're a parent meaning to do well by your family with a limited budget, what are you going to do with that money? You're going to buy a pizza that can, feed the whole family, or a basket of blueberries. And so eating well in the grocery store typically, and doing so in a way that sort of excites your family and keeps them eating well week after week, is typically more expensive than it is to eat crappy, because the produce section is one of the more expensive parts of the grocery store, partly because of our agricultural system, where most of our land and most of our resources is in the growing the ingredients to highly processed foods, and not nuts and fruits and vegetables. Yeah. Hey.
Might I ask you a question about your visits to the food conglomerates? I did some work for a while for a cheesecake factory.
Okay.
And people in the offices walk around in chef toques.
Walk around
big
in
chef's toques.
Sure.
These big high things
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the time. And I actually got into the factory where they were manufacturing key lime pie.
Okay.
And the impression I got from the staff, people there, they all really thought they were doing something healthy and good. It was clear, that they had trained themselves to believe that this menu was delicious. If you've ever eaten it, you know it.
Right.
That it's healthy, that it good, good
Right.
for the company and everything else. I wonder, forgetting the one or two people at the top, did you have that kind of an impression of the people walking around the manufacturing and the labs and the...
Yeah. I mean, I think that people, look, they're making food, not cigarettes. So, by the way, one of the fascinating things in looking at the relationship between Philip Morris and Kraft, its subsidiaries, that they hated each other. The food people hated the tobacco companies because they were creating death, sticks. And the tobacco companies sneered at the food people because they didn't have as much control of the grocery store as the tobacco guys did. So it was a really, really interesting relationship. But the food people could, look, I mean, there's nothing inherently bad about potato chips, right? It's the amount, and it's our over-dependency. So, right. So there's always been kind of this blurry fine line between getting people to like your product and to want more and more, to the point where you get cravings and you can't stop eating. And I spent a whole chapter in the book writing about this delicious moment at Kraft, when it decides on its own to start reformulating its products, cut back on salt, sugar, fat, to help people reduce their calorie intake. And it works really well But in that run-up, the scientists there who formulate the products were just kind of like, they didn't know what to think because they spent their whole lives maximizing the allure of their products. And suddenly the company was telling them, we're going to put caps on the amount of salt, sugar, fat that you can use. And it all worked well, except for one thing, which is you can't do that unilaterally. So when they put their less salt, sugar, fat cookies on the shelf, other companies swooped in with their more salt, sugar, fat cookies. Sales at Kraft went down, and they almost had to immediately scrap the healthier sort of program. So in one sense, I don't even fault them for believing in their own product. And they, like Nestle now, believe that cutting back on salt, sugar, fat is a really great thing to do, and they're proud of the work that they're doing. The problem, again, is that they're clueless when it comes to the real change, which is figuring out a way to stuff a hot pocket with broccoli and broccoli raw, because those are much more expensive ingredients to deal with. So I do see this attitude there that and some of them just don't kind of know a lot about nutrition. They know about flavor and about yumminess, but not the rest of it. So I think you'll get that. Yes.
Companies are legally allowed to make their calorie list 20 to 30 points off than it actually is. Are there any other margins of error that companies are allowed to put their ingredients that people don't realize?
I think that's a good point, and I didn't realize it was as much as 20% on calories. That's really interesting.
It's 20 calories.
Yeah, right, yeah. I don't know. I'm guessing that's probably true for everything you see on the nutrition facts box. That's a certain wiggle room, and that if you were actually to go out and test those items, you would actually see something different than what's on the box. Or, what's on the box is like an average for all of the product on certain days. Yeah. But I will just say one thing, and I'm a little heretical in this, but I've kind of come full circle. I mean, I love the nutrition facts box, don't get me wrong, but I've started to think that it could be a little bit of a trap, especially these days. The companies are finding ways to lower certain ingredients to get us to lower our guard, right? And you can see this in history too. In the 80s, we were all concerned about sugar, and so they lowered sugar and they increased the salt, sugar, fat. I'm sorry, the fat and the salt, because they have to maximize the allure, right? They're not going to cut back on that. The 90s was more about fat. They came out with low fat, but they started adding sugar and salt. And then now people are more concerned about salt, so they increased the sugar and the fat. So they're really good at playing around with the nutrient components of their foods. And a part of me just says, if we pay too much attention to the nutrition facts box and think about food too much as nutritional components, right? That kind of plays right into their hands, because we're forgetting to ask the question, well, but is this food real? I mean, okay, it's got some reasonable levels of salt, sugar, fat, but what else does it have? Does it have real fiber? And does it have real things that unprocessed food, has? And so that, I think, ultimately is maybe a better way of thinking about food and not getting even hung up over calories. Because if you're eating real foods and cooking as much as you can yourself and watching the snacking, it's harder to get too many calories than otherwise. And it's a beautiful thing when you don't have to think about that stuff in shaping your own diet. Good. Hello.
So what do the manufacturers eat? You said they don't eat their product.
Yeah, well, the Lunchables inventor, his daughter had refused to give Lunchables to their kids. So they have, they're making enough money that they have personal trainers, so they're getting lots of exercise, for example. And they're eating, well, we just talked about real foods, whole foods, cooking from scratch. One person in the family, they have enough income that one person can shop and cook from scratch, cook real foods themselves. So they're avoiding kind of the convenience. They're able to avoid the convenience allure of the highly processed food. And that's it, basically. The chief technical officer of Kraft was somebody who comes to mind. he used to run for exercise and keep his weight down on that, and he blew out his knee. And he was one of the people who would come home after work and open a bag of chips and couldn't resist eating the whole thing. And so he went cold turkey, basically, no more snacks for me. In fact, he even stopped drinking alcohol and wine, which he loved, as a way of reducing the calories he was getting because he wasn't able to run or do any sort of exercise, anything. So they're eating the way that more and more people are wanting to eat, who either can't afford it or don't yet know better about what to do. Yeah, it's the very class divide in the food system. You know, those are highly paid executives making products for most of us who don't have as much money or resources.